Hey everybody, it's Michael and I'm back with another one of my walkthrough videos, and today I want to show you Caverna, the cave farmers, or Caverna, die Höhlenbauern, as it's called in German, and this is the version I have right here. Caverna is of course the new game from Uwe Rosenberg. It released at this year's Essen Spiel. This one here is published by Lookout Spiele. Caverna is of course the sequel to Uwe Rosenberg's, I think, most popular and most famous game, Agricola. I say sequel because yes, it's of course a different game, and of course there are similarities, and you'll see those in the walkthrough, and I'll try to address them in the closing comments. A few statistics first. The game is for 1 to 7 players. Yes, this beast plays up to 7 players, and actually look how huge the box is. It takes 30 minutes per player, and it's recommended for ages 12 and up. Now, this video is actually part of a collaboration that I'm doing together with Richard Ham, or Rado as he's known on both BGG and YouTube. For those of you who don't know Richard, which I cannot believe because he's very popular, he also does walkthrough videos, although he calls them run-through videos. And he does basically the same thing, although he has a much higher output in videos, and he focuses exclusively on two-player games, or the two-player experiences. In case you don't know him yet, I've put his channel in the video notes below. Well, we both wanted to make a video of this game, of course, and we talked about how we could manage this so that both videos can maybe work together and complement each other. And since he almost exclusively has two-player games, the idea was clear that I would do a different player count to make my video as different as possible, and also we agreed that he, because he wanted to get out his video very fast, would only focus on the introduction game, while I would do the full version as it's called. And what I would also like to mention is that although our videos can be seen as complementing each other, if you only want to watch one of them, that's totally fine. You'll get the whole picture in both our videos. And finally, a little bit more about the theme and the setting of this game. This is of course an economic game. Worker placement is the one main mechanic, although there are others of course. Thematically, this is no longer farming, although the word farming or Bauern is in the title. In this game you're playing dwarves who live in a cave, and those dwarves want to amass as much wealth as possible, and for that they have to carve deeper into the mountain and also leave their cave and cut down the forest in front of it for pastures and fields. Okay, I will now show you a full 4-player game with the full version. Have fun! Before I go into full detail about the setup now, let us first take a look at the action boards. Now, these two boards are always in play because there's a 1 to 7 on them. However, in the 1 and 2 player game, round number 9 is skipped. This board over here is in a 1 to 3 player game. If you wanted to play with 3 players, you will take this very small board and just add it on the side here. If you were to play with 4 players, it is simply flipped around to the other side. And now it supports 4 to 7 players, and all the actions are basically the same, but they've become all a little bit more powerful. In a 5-player game, you will add yet another board. It's for 5 players only. In a 6-player game, you'd flip this board to the other side. And in a 7-player game, you add the small board again, but this time on the 7-player side. And that's basically it about the action boards. Now I can tell you about the full 4-player game setup. Okay, I've set up a full 4-player game now, and let's just take a brief look at the components as always. In the middle we have the action boards, now of course in the proper configuration for 4 players. On each of these rune markers, one of these rune tokens was placed randomly, and these will determine whether there will be a harvest at the end of the round or not. Then we have our cards for the different actions that come into the game over the course of the 12 rounds. Then over here we have all the furnishing tiles, now with the complex variant, so these are basically all that are in the game, and these will be used to furnish our caverns later on and give us special abilities and endgame scoring opportunities. Then down here we have some overview and reference cards. And then finally over here there's a huge supply of different things. We have wood, vegetables, grain, ore, rubies, stone, the different animals, donkeys, cattle, boars, sheep and dogs. We have food markers, we have weapon markers, we have the usual multiplayer markers, we have a marker for 6 dwarf, and then over here we have the different tiles that players can use to improve their home board. Talking about player boards, here is the blue ones. We have a mountainside and a forest. In the mountain there is a entry level dwelling where 2 dwarves and a pair of animals of the same kind can live, and the player starts with 2 dwarves. Over here in the supply there are 3 more, as well as 3 stables. The blue player is also the starting player, and this is basically about it for the player boards. Everything else will come into play during the course of the game. And before I forget, since the blue player is the starting player, he starts with 1 food, and the purple player also. The red player has 2 food, and the yellow player has 3 food. And I guess we can already start. The first thing that always happens in a new round is that we flip over one of these cards, and these are organized in stages. So for example, this is the first stage, and there are 3 cards, and they're always the same, but the order is randomized in every game. So what do we get? We get the sheep farming. So it's just put over here, and then as used in Agricola, everywhere we have one of these arrows, we need to replenish. So 1 sheep goes here. Over here we get 1 ruby. Over here we get 1 food. Then we get 2 stone here. And 2 stone over here. Then we get 3 ore. 3 wood. 2 wood. Another 2 wood. A grain. And that's it. And then, starting with the start player, everybody will take turns placing dwarves on these action spaces. And after the round there could be a harvest, but not on the first round. And the blue player decides to do the housework action. Here he can get a dog and or get the furniture room. And since he can choose the order whenever there's an and or, he decides the furniture room first. And we'll see in a second why that's the case. So, moving over to this board, he decides to get the dog school. It doesn't cost anything because there are no costs up here. It won't give him any victory points. And he has to put it into an empty cavern, and he starts with exactly 1 of those. And the effect is that with each new dog that he gets, he will also get 1 wood. And then he can get a dog from the supply and also get 1 wood. So 1 dog and 1 wood. The wood just goes anywhere, there is no special supply area, and the dog can stay anywhere on the board. He runs around all day. He doesn't need space, pastures, or anything like other animals. The purple player takes the clearing action, where he'll first get the wood on the space, and after that he can place 1 of these tiles into his forest. So you have to start from the entry of your cave, so basically the only way he could play these are like this, or the other way around. And if he goes over here and covers this space, he will actually get 1 food. So this is exactly what he does. The red player chooses excavation, which works very similar. So first of all he gets a stone, and then he can place 1 of these cavern or tunnel tiles. And those are actually 2-sided. One shows a cavern and a tunnel, the other side shows 2 caverns. And on this space you can choose. On this one you couldn't, but here you can choose. But he decides to place the one with the cavern and the tunnel. Again, you have to place it adjacent from where you already are. So here, here, or down here. And on here you will get 1 food. So he decides to place it like this, and he gets the stone and the food. The yellow player decides to go ore mining, so he gets the ore. And if he had any ore mines constructed, then he would get another 2 for each mine, but for now it's only 3. The blue player decides to go drift mining, so he gets 2 stone and he gets to place 1 of these tiles, but only in the version where there's a tunnel and a cavern, not the other way around. And he decides to put it like this, so he also gets a food. The purple player decides to go on a forest exploration, so he gets 2 wood and also 2 food. The red player decides to take growth, where he can either get a bunch of everything or can get a child, but to have a child you would need 1 of these new dwellings first to actually have space for it. So he can only get this action, and he'll get a wood, an ore, a stone, a food, and 2 gold. What does gold do? Basically it's victory points directly, so these are 2 victory points. But if you look here on this conversion table, we see that 2 gold are also 1 food, and basically the rule is that any amount of gold can be converted into 1 less food. And finally the yellow player decides to become the starting player, so he gets the food, 1 ruby, and also the start player marker. Now, what do rubies do? Basically, they're kind of wild cards. For 1 ruby, you can get any of the things depicted here on this overview. These are single tunnel, field, or meadow spaces that you normally wouldn't get at all, and they will, of course, help you fill your board quicker. And for 2 rubies, you can also get a single cavern tile, and for 1 ruby and 1 food, you will get a piece of cattle. And of course these rubies will allow for a huge amount of flexibility, because you can change them any time for whatever you want. Then we're already done with the first round, so everybody takes back their workers. There is no harvest, and we can move immediately into round number 2. In round number 2, the blacksmithing comes out, where the dwarves will be able to forge weapons from ore. And then we need to replenish, of course. Now this notation was introduced in the two-player Agricola game, all creatures big and small. If the space is empty, this will accumulate, but if it's not empty, the thing in brackets will accumulate. So we will put a vegetable down here. The yellow player would really like to forge a weapon, but maybe he wants to get a little bit more ore first. And the thing is, only the red player also has ore, the others don't. And the yellow player doesn't actually think that the red player will go for forging a weapon with only one ore. So he decides that it's safe if he takes the growth action first and gets a bunch of stuff. The blue player takes the housework again, so he gets another dog, and because of the dog school, another wood. And then he decides to pick this office, which costs 1 stone, is worth 2 victory points, and will now allow him to put furnishings on tunnels. So this one has to go here because it's his last empty cave. But from now on he can also build furnishing on these tunnels. And he has to pay a stone, of course. The purple player selects sustenance, so he gets a grain and a veggie, and afterwards he can place another one of these tiles, and he decides to place it like this, so he can later on turn this into a big pasture. The red player decides for another excavation, so he gets 2 stone, he gets to place 1 tile, and he puts it down like this. And we'll see later on why exactly he did that. The yellow player goes to forge a weapon, so he can pay up to 8 ore to get a weapon of the same strength. He currently has 4 ore, which he decides to pay. And so we go over here to our weapon chits and take a 4 and now put it on top of this dwarf, and from now on it has to stay with him. He can't give it to the other one, and each dwarf can only forge his own weapon. So for example, if he came back here later on, he couldn't forge a weapon for the other dwarf. And after that we can go on an expedition, and whenever you see this shield with an axe and a number in it, that's an expedition. The number in the expedition will tell you how many pieces of loot you can bring back. And if we take a look at this loot table, then these different pieces of loot have different requirements in strength. And since we have 4 strength, we can take now 3 pieces of loot, because it says 3 here, of up to 4. So basically we can select 3 things from this table here, but we can't choose the same thing twice. And the yellow player decides to take a stone, 2 pieces of ore, and a vegetable. And after any expedition, the dwarf has gathered some experience, so his strength will increase by 1. So he's now 5. The blue player decides to take these 2 rubies. The purple player decides to select slash and burn, which allows him to first place another one of these tiles. And he puts it down here, so he covers one of these boar reservations. And that means that he gets a boar. Now, he doesn't have any pastures yet, only meadows, and since there are no stables on them, he can't keep them there. But in his entry-level dwelling, he can keep a pair of animals, so the boar can go here. And afterwards, he can get to sow up to 2 veggies and 2 grain. He has 1 of each. So basically, 1 could go here, and 1 could go to here on this field. And then, as in Agricola, whenever you sow grain, you get 2 from the supply, and whenever you sow a veggie, you get 1 from the supply. So let's go like this, and like this. And then the red player decides to go on this cutting space and get 6 wood. Then it's the end of the round. Again, we don't have harvest, so we can move into the 3rd round. And now we get the ore mine construction, and everything replenishes. Now there's a rule. Whenever you place a dwarf, you have to place your weakest dwarf first, and of course if a dwarf doesn't have a weapon, he's weaker than those with a weapon. The thing is, you can pay 1 ruby to ignore that rule for 1 dwarf, and this is exactly what the yellow player does. So he pays 1 of his rubies and uses this dwarf to furnish a cavern. So he gets a dog, and then he picks the blacksmith. That'll cost him 1 wood and 1 stone, which he can pay exactly. And then he gets 2 ore immediately, and whenever he forges another weapon, he gets a discount of 2. And he can only place it here. Before the blue player performs his action, he decides to pay 1 of his rubies to get a single space meadow, which he has placed right here. And then he selects the sheep farming. First, he can pay 2 wood to turn a single space meadow into a single space pasture. And he does that. So this is flipped around. It's worth 2 victory points and is now a pasture that can hold 2 animals of the same kind. Then he could also make a big pasture, but he doesn't have the meadows or the wood. Then he can get 1 stable for 1 stone. He pays a stone. He can put a stable now anywhere in the forest or on this pasture, and he actually decides to put it on the pasture, so now there can be 4 animals of the same kind. And after that he gets all the sheep, and he can put all of them on his new pasture. The purple player would have liked to do the same, because he has the space and the wood, but now he has to think of something else. And he decides to get some stone, and also put down a tile like this, so he gets another food. The red player decides to construct an ore mine, and as you can see, an ore mine has to go on 2 adjacent tunnels, which he has, and this is why he placed them like this. And so you can put the ore mine here, it'll be worth 3 victory points. And also whenever you build an ore mine, you immediately get 3 ore. And after that you could go on a tour expedition, so basically while carving the mine into the mountain, the dwarf discovers something, but this dwarf doesn't have a weapon yet. So unfortunately he can't do this. The other player sends his other dwarf to the blacksmith. Now, he has 4 ore, but the blacksmith gives him a discount of 2, so he can actually forge a weapon of strength 6. And so again he can choose 3 rewards, and now he can choose up to here. One of the rewards is that after the expedition all weapons of all your dwarves increase by 1. So this is what he selects as one of his pieces of loot. Then he selects a boar, and finally a piece of wood. The boar can go here, and afterwards this one would be a 7, but since he chose that each weapon increased by 1, this one actually goes up to 8, and the 5 over here is now a 6. The blue player decides to become starting player again, so he gets the 2 food plus a ruby. The purple player selects the imitation space. He has to pay 2 food, and then he can copy any other space that is occupied by an opponent, but not the starting player. And he decides to copy the housework, so he first gets a dog, and then he decides to build the guest room for a wood and a stone. And this lets him treat either or as and or on any action spaces. And he decides to put it here. The red player decides to take the sustenance, so he gets to place 1 tile here and gets food. And then it's the end of the round and the harvest. But first everybody takes back their workers. Why do we know that there's a harvest? Because of this green leaf symbol here. In the harvest, first everybody takes off one of each of their sown goods on the fields. So the purple player gets a grain and a veggie. Then you have to feed all of your dwarves. Each dwarf takes 2 food, a baby takes 1 food, but we don't have any babies yet. For the yellow player, that's easy. The same holds for the blue player and the red player. However, the purple player only has 3 food and food markers, so he decides to slaughter the boar. That'll give him 2 food, so he'll keep 1. And then it's breeding phase. If you have at least 2 of any of the farm animals, which doesn't include dogs, they will have a baby. So no matter how many, if you have at least 2, you'll get a baby. And the blue player has 3 sheep, so he'll get a 4th one. And then we can move into the 4th round. In the 4th round, always the card wishing for children comes up and will allow to either get a child or furnish a dwelling, and a dwelling are only the orange furnishings. And after this round we won't have a harvest, but we have to pay 1 food for each dwarf. And of course we replenish. The blue player takes all the ore. The purple player takes the wish for children, and thanks to his guest room he can treat the either or as an and or, and then he can choose the order. So first of all he has to furnish a dwelling. And the thing is, he only has 3 stone and 3 wood remaining. And the normal dwellings cost 4 and 3 and will give 3 victory points. But there is one that doesn't give him any victory points, but which is cheaper. So he has to pay all of his stuff. He can place the dwelling down here. And now, since he has room for another child, he can take a 3rd marker and put it with this one. And from the next round on, he will have 3 workers. The red player selects the housework, so he gets a dog, and he gets to furnish a cabin. And he decides to select the mining cave. It'll cost him 3 wood and 2 stone. He can put it here, and it'll allow him to save 1 food when feeding his dwarves for each donkey that is in a mine. The yellow player selects logging, so he gets 6 wood and has 1 expedition afterwards. And again he selects the reward or the loot that after the expedition all weapons increase by 1. So the 8 dwarf at home actually becomes a 9, and the 6 becomes an 8. The blue player sends a dwarf to forge a weapon. He has 7 ore, he decides to pay all of them. He could also turn a ruby into 1 ore, but he decides not to do that. And so this dwarf now has a strength of 7, and he can go on a 3 expedition. And now a strength of 7 will allow you to actually furnish a cavern. You still have to pay the cavern, but you don't have to expend the action. So this is what he likes to do. But he doesn't have any resources. Of course he could swap in the rubies, but he actually decides to take 1 piece of wood first. Then he also decides to take a vegetable. and then he can furnish a room. And he decides to select the stone supplier, which will cost him his wood. It can go here, thanks to his office. And at the start of the next 5 rounds, he will get a stone. And we already know this from Agricola, so we just put out 5 stones for the next 5 rounds. And of course, afterwards, this 7 becomes an 8. The purple player realizes that he'll have to pay 3 food very soon. He only has 1. So he decides to do a forest exploration, which will give him the 4 wood here and another 2 food. The red player decides to take the 2 rubies, and he immediately decides to trade in 1 ruby for a donkey. And donkeys could go in pastures or in here, but also 1 donkey can live in a mine, so he decides to put him here. And thanks to this mining cave, he will now have to pay 1 food less each time he has to feed his dwarfs. Now the yellow player could go on an expedition, but to go here, he would have to pay first 2 food for the imitation. And if he went here, it would be a bit of a waste because he can't build an ore mine yet, and then he would only get 2 rewards. So he actually decides to move over here and get a bit of everything. Then everybody takes their dwarfs back, and everybody has to pay 1 food per dwarf. The purple player simply pays 3 food. Thanks to his mining cavern, the red player only has to pay 1 food, which he can afford. The yellow player simply has to pay 2 food. The blue player also has to pay for 2 food. He doesn't have food directly. He could spend a ruby or the vegetable, and he decides to just pay the vegetable. He could also slaughter his sheep, but he doesn't feel like doing that, so he goes with the veggie. And since this is the normal harvest, we just continue into the 5th round, after which there will be a harvest again. The blue player gets his stone, and then we get donkey farming, which works exactly like sheep farming, just with donkeys. And then we refill. The blue player decides to collect all the wood, and he also gets to place a tile, and he puts it down like this, so he also gets the food. The purple player decides to expand, so he selects the excavation, and he decides to put his tile down like this, with the 2 caverns up. The red player gets a dog, and decides to build this working cave for 1 stone and a wood, and allow him to feed exactly 1 dwarf with either 1 wood, 1 stone, or 2 ore. The yellow player decides to get some stone, and he can also place a tile like this and get 1 food. Before the blue player takes his action, he decides to pay 1 ruby to put down a tunnel tile like this, and then he sends his dwarf over here. He can't forge a weapon because that one already has one, but he can go on a 3 expedition. So first of all, he selects a stone, then he decides to furnish a cavern, and he decides to take the slaughter cave. It can go here. He has to pay 2 stone and 2 wood. And from now on, whenever he slaughters a farm animal, he gets 1 food more. Finally, he also decides to take a boar, and the boar can go over here. And after that, that guy becomes a 9. Purple player decides to imitate. He has to pay 2 food, so he gives up a veggie. Then he copies the housework, so he gets another dog. And he's able to furnish the cooking cave for 2 stone. And he decides to put it over here. And from now on, he can trade 1 vegetable and 1 grain for 5 food. And normally that'll only be 3. The red player decides to become starting player, so he gets 2 food and a ruby. The yellow player decides to go here. He can't build an ore mine. First, he chooses a piece of stone, and then he chooses to furnish a cavern, and he decides to go with this dwelling for 2. It costs 8 wood and 6 stone, and he has exactly that. It can go here, and as the name implies, it offers room for 2 dwarfs. Finally, the purple player, because he has a 3rd dwarf, decides to take the sustenance, so he gets these 2 and also can place down a tile. He decides to place it up here, so he gets another boar. Then everybody takes the dwarfs home again, and we'll have another harvest. First, we can harvest from our fields, so the purple player will get these 2. Then everybody has to feed. The blue player decides to slaughter the boar. Normally that would only give 2 food, but thanks to the cave, that's actually 3. And with that extra 1, he can feed his 2 dwarfs. The yellow player needs 4 food, so he decides to give up the vegetable for 2, 3, and then 2 coins will also be 1 food, so that's 4 food. The red player can feed 1 of his dwarfs with a building material, so he decides to give up these 2 ore, and then he can save 1 food for the other dwarf, so overall he only has to pay 1 more food. The purple player needs 6 food, but first of all he can trade in a pair of vegetables and grain for 5 food. So he trades in 1 pair. He could actually trade more, but he's fine. And then he decides to slaughter the boar, so he'll actually get 1 food back. And then the blue player gets another sheep, which can still be put into this cave. Now, starting with the 6th round, it'll always be random whether there will be a harvest or not, or maybe some other effect. So we flip over this tile. There will be a harvest at the end of the 6th round. The stone goes to the blue player, and we get the ruby mine construction. Then of course we have to replenish. The red player selects the ruby mine construction. He can either place a ruby mine on a normal tunnel or on a tunnel on an ore mine, which is also called a deep tunnel. And if he does that, he gets an extra ruby. And this is exactly what he does. So that's worth 4 points. So he gets a ruby, but he immediately spends that ruby to get a donkey to put it into this mine. So from now on he'll save 2 food whenever he needs to feed his dwarves. The yellow player has room for 2 more dwarves, so he decides to have a baby. The blue player decides to do an excavation over here, and he puts down the tile like this. Knowing that the red player will get an additional ruby because of his 1 ruby mine, when he goes here, the purple player decides to take these 2 rubies. And by the way, an ore mine gives you +2 for each on the ore mining, but if you have at least 1 ruby mine, you get 1 ruby more. The red player does some housework, so he gets a dog, and then he decides to build the quarry for 1 wood. And the quarry will give him 1 stone for each newborn donkey. The yellow player decides to go on the 3 expedition. Now he can choose up to 9. And 9 is placing down a single tunnel, which he puts down here so he can build a mine later on. And then he also chooses a boar and a wedgie. The blue player first pays a ruby to put down a single tunnel tile over here. And then he sends his dwarf to construct an ore mine. He gets to place a mine down here. He gets 3 ore. And then he can go on a 2 expedition. Now with up to 9 he could actually build a single tunnel tile, which is not that interesting at the moment. He could fence in a single pasture for only 1 wood, which he could do over here, but actually he also wants to think about getting another worker, another baby, and so he decides to first take a stone and then furnish a cavern, the mixed dwelling, which offers room for 1 dwarf and 1 pair of animals. So that's 5 wood and 4 stone. And it could actually go in the deep tunnel, thanks to the office, but he wants to reserve that one for a ruby mine later on, so he just puts it here. The purple player trades in 1 ruby for a vegetable, and then he selects the slash and burning. So first of all he gets to place down another tile, and he decides to place it like this. And afterwards he can sow up to 2 of each kind, which is exactly what he has. And finally he moves over here, gets 2 stone, and gets built yet another tile. And he puts down like this, so he gets another 2 food. It's the end of the round. Everybody takes back their dwarves, and we'll have a harvest. First, the purple player gets to harvest a lot. The blue player needs 4 food, so thanks to his cave he can just give up 2 sheep. The purple player needs 6 food, and he can trade in these 2 for 5, plus an additional 1. The red player can, thanks to his working cave, feed 1 of his dwarves with a piece of stone, and then the other one doesn't need anything because we have 2 donkeys in a mine. Since this is still a baby, the yellow player needs 5 food, so he slaughters 2 boar and also gives up a vegetable, so he gets 1 food back. The blue player gets another sheep. The red player gets another donkey, which can stay here, and thanks to the quarry he'll also get a stone for the newborn donkey. Then, moving into the 7th round, the blue player gets a stone. We have a red question mark, so we go up here to this overview card, and first red question mark that we draw is that there will be no harvest. Then we get an exploration, which is an expedition for 4, and then of course we need to replenish. The red player makes an excavation. He puts a tile up here, so he gets 2 food. The yellow player goes to the blacksmith with his new dwarf. He has 1 ore, but he gets a discount of 2, so he can forge a weapon of strength 3. Then he gets 3 rewards. First of all, he takes that each weapon increases by 1, and then he takes a stone and a wood. So this one becomes a 5 afterwards. This one a 9, and this one an 11. The blue player goes over here to get a baby. This is also what the purple player would have liked, because he could use this as an end ore. So what he decides to do is move over here, pay 2 for the imitation, then do the dwelling first, and he can afford one of the normal dwellings. He puts it in here, and afterwards he can immediately have his second baby. Before the red player takes his action, he trades in 1 ruby for a single tunnel tile, and then he constructs yet another ore mine, and then he can place the mine up here, and of course he can move the donkey in here, so he'll have yet another reduction in food cost. The yellow player doesn't have another empty cavern to put a furnishing in, but this 4 expedition is just good to pass on, so he goes there. So he takes a stable, which he can build for free, and he decides to just put it into the forest. Then he decides to get a boar and a sheep. The boar can go into the stable in the forest, that's a new rule, and the sheep can just go in here. And then finally, again, he selects that all weapons improve by 1. The blue player decides to build a ruby mine, and since it's on a deep tunnel, he immediately gets 1 ruby. The purple player decides to take all the wood. He can't use the expedition, and then he decides to take the sheep farming. First he can build a single meadow for 2, and then he can build a large one for 4. So this becomes a large one, this becomes a small one. Normally you could flip this tile around, but since there's something on it, I'll just use these single tiles. Then he can also build a stable for 1 stone, and then he gets 4 sheep, which can all be put here. Actually, I think it's better if the stable goes here, so it has to look like this, but then he can fit more animals over here. And then with no expeditions available for the veteran dwarf over here, the yellow player decides to go over here and have another baby. He still has room in his dwelling for 2, and then it's the end of the round. We don't have harvest at all, so we basically can immediately move into round number 8. The blue player gets a stone, we'll check the marker, there will be a normal harvest, and we get the ore delivery, which will accumulate a stone and ore, plus everybody who goes there gets another 2 ore for each of their ore mines. And then we'll replenish. The red player takes all the wood from here, and he also gets to place a tile, which he just places like this. The yellow player forges yet another weapon. He doesn't have any ore, so that'll just be a 2. He'll get a sheep, a wood, and again an increase of all weapons by 1. The blue player goes over here. He doesn't have enough wood to build any fences, but he has a stone, so he decides to put a stable over here. And then finally he gets all 4 donkeys, 2 of which can go into this cavern, and 2 of which can go here in this mixed dwelling. Purple decides to become the starting player. Red builds another ruby mine into a deep tunnel, so he gets another ruby, but he immediately spends it for yet another donkey that he can put in there. The yellow player sends his weakest dwarf out to do an excavation, and he puts down the tile like this. Blue player takes the sustenance, puts down the tile like this, so he gets a boar that he can put in the stable here. The purple player goes drift mining, and he places down the tile like this. The yellow player takes his 12 dwarf and puts it on the exploration, and he takes a veggie, then a single field space, then a single meadow space, which he puts here, so he gets food. Then he can fence in a single meadow for just 1 wood, so he pays that. And those were already 4 pieces of loot. The blue player goes logging over here, and he decides to fence in a large meadow for just 2 wood. He also decides to spend his ruby for another boar, so they can start breeding immediately. The purple player moves over here, so he gets all the wood and 2 food. The yellow player decides to construct an ore mine. He can place it here. Then he can go on a 2 expedition, and he decides to first take a wood and then build this. Well, it's called a cord supplier here, but basically it is a ruby supplier for 2 and 2. You can put it here, and then at the beginning of the next 4 rounds, so for the rest of the game, he will get a ruby. And afterwards, this one becomes a 14, which is the highest level possible. And then the purple player decides to come here to first furnish a dwelling. He decides to put it up here, so he has to pay 4 wood and 3 stone. And afterwards, he can have yet another baby. And then we're at the end of the round, so everybody takes back their dwarves, and we'll have another harvest. The purple player harvests. Then he has to pay 9 food, because 1 is still a baby. So he trades in a pair of grain and veggie, plus 4. On a second thought, instead of paying 1 of those 4 food, he decides to slaughter a sheep. The blue player needs 6 food, so he decides to slaughter a pair of donkeys. And a pair of donkeys normally gives 3, but since he gets plus 1 for each, that's 5. And then another sheep would be 7, so he still gets 1 food back. The red player can take care of all of his workers because of the donkeys in his mines. The yellow player needs 8 food. A veggie and 2 food are 4, and 2 sheep is 6, and 1 boar is 8. Then blue gets a sheep and a boar and a donkey. Purple player gets a sheep. The red player gets a donkey, and so he also gets a stone. And the yellow player doesn't get anything. Then, the 9th round. Blue player gets a stone. Yellow player gets a ruby. There will be no harvest at the end of the round, but instead we have to pay 1 food for each of our dwarfs. We'll get family life, which allows to either get a child and or sow. And as soon as family life comes into play, the wish for children becomes an urgent wish for children, which is now either both furnishing a dwelling and then having a baby, or plus 3 gold. And of course, as always, we need to replenish. The purple player takes the rubies. The red player takes the urgent wish for children, so he can first furnish a dwelling for 4 wood and 3 stone, as always, and then he can have his first baby. The yellow player decides to pay a ruby to place his 14 strength dwarf first on the exploration. First, he decides to get another field. And by the way, I didn't mention this before, unlike in Agricola, fields don't have to go next to each other anymore. Then he chooses both a vegetable and a grain. And finally he chooses to sow both. Once you have your dwarfs leveled up to the limit, you can basically copy any action that would be available otherwise. The blue player takes the slash and burn, puts the tile down like this, and then he gets to sow. The purple player decides to imitate this space to get 3 gold. The red player decides to do another excavation, and he puts it like this. The yellow player sends his dwarf to go logging. As a reward, he decides to pick up a stone, and afterwards this guy becomes a 5. The blue player moves over here and builds yet another tile, and he decides to put it like this, so he gets 2 food. The purple player decides to move over here to get a bunch of everything. He could also get a child, but he doesn't have more room. The yellow player selects sustenance, puts down the tile like this, so he also gets a boar, which he can put into the stable. The blue player decides to take all the ore, and he gets an extra 2 for his ore mine. Now that he has 5 gold, the purple player can come over here, get a dog, and then build this living room, which will cost him 3 stone. He doesn't have those, but he can trade in 2 rubies for 2 stone. He also has to pay 5 gold. And then this one will give him immediately 2 food for each adjacent dwelling. And at the end of the game, it will give him 4 victory points for each adjacent dwelling. So if he puts it down here, that'll be 12 points at the end of the game, and also 6 food right now. And I just realized that he has a stone down here, so we can actually take 1 ruby back. The yellow player goes smithing, but of course he's only after the expedition. First of all, he wants to furnish a room, and he selects the weapon storage, which will give him 3 points at the end of the game per weapon. It can go here, it costs 3 wood and 2 stone, and then he decides to take a boar, and they both can go here, and a vegetable. And then the purple player builds an ore mine up here, so he gets 3 ore. It's the end of the round, there is no real harvest, but everybody has to pay 1 food for each dwarf. The blue player has to pay 3 food, which he has lying around. The purple player has to pay 5 food. Again, he just has those lying around. The red player doesn't have to pay anything. The yellow player needs 4 food, so he decides to turn in the vegetable and 1 of the boars. Then there's no breeding because that wasn't a harvest, so we can immediately move into round 10. The yellow player gets a ruby. There will be a harvest at the end of the turn, but each player has to decide whether he wants to skip the field harvesting phase or the breeding phase. And then we get another form of ruby mining, where 2 rubies will accumulate, and then you can get an additional ruby if you have at least 2 ruby mines. The purple player selects the ore delivery. The red player takes the ruby delivery, where he can get 2, plus a 3rd one, since he has at least 2 ruby mines. The yellow player decides to become the starting player. The blue player comes over to the housework, where he gets another dog and thus a wood, but he immediately spends the wood for the cuddle room, where he can have as many sheep as he has dwarves, so there's now space for 3 sheep up here. The purple player moves here, so first he can furnish a dwelling, and he decides to pick this extra dwelling, which will go over here. It costs 4 and 3, and it says that it offers room only for the 6th dwarf. But afterwards he can actually take a family growth action again, so he gets the 6th dwarf, And since he has the guest room, he can treat this as an and/or, so he also gets the 3 gold. The red player moves over here, then he copies the housework. He can build this, again it's a special kind of mine, and at the beginning of each round he'll get 2 ore for each donkey in an ore mine. Maybe this is a bit late, but it's a nice synergy anyway. And we can put this here. The yellow player moves over here and builds yet another tile, and he gets 2 food. The blue player moves over here to the blacksmithing. He selects 8 of his 16 ore. Then, seeing that the yellow player already took the weapon storage, he decides to go a different route. So he selects the furnishing cavern, peaceful cave, which will allow him to trade in weapons one-on-one for their strength into food. As a second reward, he decides to build a stable up here. And finally he selects 2 gold. Purple selects slash and burning, so he can put down his final tile, and he can sow 2 of each. The red player builds yet another ruby mine. This time it can go only on a normal tunnel, so he doesn't get an extra ruby. The yellow player sends his 14 dwarf on an exploration. First he decides to take a piece of wood, then he decides to furnish a cavern, and he decides to take this provisions room. It'll cost him 3 food and 1 wood. 8 points at the end of the game if all of his dwarves have weapons. So that were 2 rewards. Third, he takes a stable, puts it in here, and finally he also takes a boar. The blue player sends his dwarf logging, and she decides to bring back a cow. Now, where can it go? The thing is that dogs can guard sheep, and any number of dogs on a meadow, be it with or without a stable, can guard their number plus 1 sheep. So if we move the 4 sheep over here, guarded by 3 dogs, we can now move the single cow into here. The purple player comes over here. The yellow player first pays a ruby to put down a single tunnel here. Then he goes to construct an ore mine on here. And afterwards he can go on a 2 expedition. So he places a cavern, which is not possible since he's at strength 14. And second, he also decides to bring back 1 cow. And finally the purple player decides to get more wood, but he can't place any more of these tiles. And then everybody takes back the workers, and we have a harvest, but with special rules. The yellow player needs 8 food, so he decides to have a field phase. That's 6 food, and then he decides to slaughter a pig. So that's 8 food, and then it doesn't matter that he has to skip the breeding phase. There's nothing left to breed anyway. The blue player needs 6 food. He decides to skip the field phase. He can use his peaceful cavern to change in a weapon for its strength amount and food. So he decides to cash in this 9 weapon. So after deducting the 6 food, he's still left with 3. He pays a ruby and a food to get a second cow. Then his animals can be produced. So there will be another donkey who can live up here. There will be another cow in here. Another pig can live here. And another sheep. It can't go here, but it can be up in the cattle room. The purple player needs 11 food because the last dwarf is still a baby. He decides to have his field phase, and then he decides to trade in a pear, a ruby, that's 2, so it's 7, plus 4 is 11. The red player can feed 1 dwarf by paying 2 ore, and the other 4 food he doesn't need because he has 4 donkeys in mines. Actually, let's make that 5, and afterwards he gets a new donkey and thus a stone. Then we move into round 11. The ruby goes to the yellow player. There will be a harvest, and then we get ore trading, where we can trade in up to 3 times 2 ore for 2 gold and a food. And because he has 2 donkeys in ore mines, the red player receives 2 ore at the start of the round. The yellow player uses the new ore trade. He has exactly 6 ore, so he can get 6 coins and 3 food. The blue player selects the excavation and puts down 2 caverns, although for him it wouldn't really matter. Purple player selects donkey farming. So first he can build up to 2 pastures and a stable. So he builds a small pasture here and a large one here for a total of 6 wood. Then he can build a stable for 1 stone, and finally he can place all the donkeys in here. The red player takes the ruby delivery again. The yellow player goes logging, and for his reward he decides to furnish a cavern, and he picks the main storage. It will give him 2 points at the end of the game for each yellow building, including the main storage, so far that's 6. The red player sends this dwarf to the blacksmith. He has 8 ore left. He gets an 8 weapon. he decides to furnish a room, prayer chamber, and it'll give him 8 points at the end of the game if none of his dwarves has any weapons, and given the fact that he has the peaceful caliph, that should be doable. And then he decides to get 2 gold and a vegetable. The purple player uses the imitation, and he likes to imitate the excavation. And I didn't specifically mention this, but because there is no stone here anymore, the only thing that he can imitate is this one, but the main thing for him is that he can actually place 2 caverns. The red player gets a dog and gets to furnish a room, but first he has to pay 2 rubies to get a single cavern tile, and then he selects the treasure chamber for 1/1, and it'll give him 1 point at the end of the game for each ruby that he has. The yellow player goes on big exploration. He selects a single cavern tile, then fencing in a small pasture for 1 wood. This gets fenced in, and then he selects to receive another piece of cattle and another boar. The player moves in here. He gets to place a tile like this, so he gets another boar which can still go here. The purple player selects the sheep farming. He doesn't have any meadows left to fence in, but he can pay a stone to put down his final stable, and then all the sheep can fit in there. The red player gets 2 + 1 ruby. The yellow player moves here, gets another tile, and he trades in his 2 rubies for 2 vegetables, and sows both of them. The purple player collects 3 gold, then he collects a little bit of everything, and finally he decides to become the starting player for the last round. Everybody goes home, and we have a harvest. The yellow player harvests. He needs 8 food, so 4, 5, 8. And then he gets another boar that can go here, and another cattle that can go here. The blue player harvests. He needs 6 food. He decides to trade in this 9 weapon, so again he gets 3 food back. He gets another boar. He gets another cow. The dog and sheep can move up here. The baby sheep can still go in the cuddle room, and then the baby donkey can go in the stable here. The purple player harvests. He needs 12 food, so he decides to trade in 2 pairs plus additional 2 food. Then he gets another donkey, another sheep that can go in here, and then he decides to buy 2 boars, so they can breed immediately, and they all fit over here. And then finally the red player needs 6 food, but he has 5 donkeys and mines, so he decides to don't use the working cave and just pay the remaining food. And he also gets another donkey and yet another stone. And then we can move into the final round. The yellow player gets his ruby. Yes, there will be a harvest. The red player gets 2 ore. And then finally we have an adventure where you can craft weapons again and then have up to 2 1 expeditions. The purple player gets a dog and decides to build the broom chamber that costs 1 wood. And you get 10 points at the end of the game. If he has 6 dwarfs, 5 for 5, but since he has 6, that's a sure 10 points now. He decides to put it up here. The red player decides to take 3 rubies again. The yellow player goes logging, and from the expedition he decides to bring back 2 pieces of ore. The blue player decides to slash and burn, puts down a tile like this, and then he sows 2 vegetables. The red player decides to use the imitation by paying a ruby, and he likes to copy the sow action, but first he trades another ruby for a vegetable, and then he can sow like this. The red player takes the clearing and he puts it up here, and so he gets a boar, but to be able to place it he decides to slaughter 2 donkeys for 3 food, and then the boar can go in here. The yellow player decides to pay a ruby to send one of his bigger dwarfs out first. First he decides to furnish this room with a stone storage that costs 3 wood and 1 ore, and will give a victory point for each stone. Then he decides to put down both a field and a meadow, and he also builds a stable. The blue player takes 2 rubies. The purple player forges a weapon for 7, and then he decides to furnish the ore storage, which will give him 1 point for each 2 ore, so he has to see that he can collect a little bit more again. He puts it up here, and then I just realized that he doesn't have any stone, so one of the other rewards will have to be that he gets a stone. And then he has 1 reward left, and for that he takes 2 more ore. The red player goes sheep farming. First of all he pays 6 wood to turn this into a small pasture and this into a large one. Then he pays a stone for a stable somewhere in the forest where he can immediately move the boar to. And then he gets the 1 sheep and he just puts it over here. And while he's at it, he pays a ruby and a food to get a cow that he puts in here. The yellow player goes in the sustenance space and decides to place the tile like this, so he gets another boar. Blue player just takes the expedition. First, you would like to furnish a room, the fodder chamber, that'll give him 1 point for each 3 farm animals. That costs him 2 grain and a stone. And then he decides to pay 1 wood to turn this into a small pasture. And then he moves the donkey over into a mine. And finally, he pays a ruby to put an empty meadow over here. Purple builds a ruby mine up here. Yellow simply takes all the stone. Purple takes all the ore, plus 2 more. And finally, purple gives away 6 ore again for 6 gold coins and 3 food. And then everybody can go home and we'll have a final harvest. The yellow player harvests, and then he decides to slaughter 1 cow for 3, a pig for 2, that's 5, plus another 3 is 8. But then he gets both a pig or a boar and a cow back. The blue player harvests, then he trades in his 12 weapon, he needs 6, so he gets another 6 food back. His donkeys breed, and the baby can go into this mine. His sheep breed, and the baby sheep can go over here. His cattle breed, and the baby can go in here. And his boars breed, and the baby can go in here. Purple harvests, he needs 12 food that he can pay like this, and then he also turns in a ruby and a food to get a single cow. Then he gets a new boar in here, a new sheep that can go down here, and a new donkey up here. The red player doesn't harvest, he only has to pay 1 food, and then at least his donkeys multiply or breed, and so he gets another stone. And then we can go into the final scoring, which you'll see is much less specific than Agricola. The thresholds are no longer there, and there are way less negative points to get. First category is 1 point for each farm animal and dog. The yellow player has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 animals. The red player has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. The purple player has 10, 14, 15, 20, 24. And the blue player has 6, 9, 13, 20, 21, 24, 28. Then -2 for each missing kind of farm animal. That means missing dogs don't count. The blue player has all 4 kinds of farm animals, and so does the purple player, and so does the red player, if only barely. The yellow player, however, is missing both sheep and donkeys, so that's -4. Then half a point per grain, rounded up. The blue player has 4 grain altogether, because it doesn't matter whether they're in the storage or still out on the fields, so that's 2 points. The purple player also has 4, so another 2 points. The red player has 1, so that's 1 point rounded up. The same is true for the yellow player. Then 1 point per vegetable, so the blue player has 8. The purple player has 2, the red player has none, and the yellow player has 2. 1 point per ruby, the blue player has 1, purple hasn't any, yellow hasn't any, and red has 10. 1 point per dwarf, way less than back in Agricola. Then -1 for each unused space. The blue player has none, the purple player has none, the red player has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the yellow player has 1. Furnishings, pastures and mines as printed on them. For the blue player, 2 and 4 and 2 is 8, and 1 is 9, and 2 is 11, and another 2 is 13, and 4 is 17, and 4 is 21, and 3 is 24, and 2 is 26, and 2 is 28. Purple. 2 and 2 and 4 and 4 are 12. Then lots of zeros. 3 is 15, 2 is 17, 5 is 22, 3 is 25, and another 7 is 32. For the red player, 6 out in pastures, and 4 is 10, and 2 is 12, and 2 is 14, and 3 is 17, and 2 is 19, and 4 is 23, and 3 is 26, and 3 is 29, plus another 7 is 36. And finally yellow, 4 out here, plus 3 is 7, plus 5 is 12, plus 2 is 14, plus 3 is 17, plus 3 is 20. Then we have victory points for the different kinds of furnishings that give endgame points. The blue player has a prayer chamber, which is 8 points. If all of his dwarves don't have a weapon, add the scoring. that is the case, so that's 8 points. And then he gets 1 point for each 3 farm animals. And he has 25 farm animals, so that's another 8 points. Purple has the living room, that gives 4 for each adjacent dwelling, so that's 12. And then the broom chamber, 10 because he has 6 dwarves, 22. And another one for each 2 ore, that's 8 ore, another 4 points, so 26 altogether. Red simply gets another point for each ruby, so that's another 10 points. Yellow has 3 points for each weapon, so that's 12. Another 8 if every dwarf has a weapon, that is the case, so that's 8, we're 20. 2 points for each yellow furnishing, that's another 8 points, so we're 28. And then 1 point per stone, that's 7 stone, so 35. And then finally, gold from gold coins and begging chits. Begging chits are similar in Agricola. If you can't pay food during the feeding your family phase, you have to take one of these for each food you're missing. We didn't have this in this game at all, but they would be -3 each. So blue has 4 gold coins, purple has 14, red has 2, and yellow has 8. So purple has 106 points, then blue 90, then yellow 75, and red 71, making purple the overall winner. And that was one full game of Caverna with all the tiles in play. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of Caverna, the Höhlenbauern or the cave farmers. Again, strategy-wise, that probably wasn't the optimal play for all of the 4 players, but I'm not trying to teach you the strategy of the game. In this game, even more so than in my other videos, what I wanted to show you was the full game, the different furnishing tiles, as many as possible actually, how they can interact with each other, and also what kind of strategies follow from that. And I hope, at least in this case, I was successful. Also, you know now probably all of the rules. I may have skimmed over some of the more detailed rules a little bit, so if you get this, please take a look at the rules as written and just don't play after what I've shown you here. Yeah, and I also hope that you might now have an impression whether this is enough of a difference for you in comparison with Agricola. Of course, addressing the big elephant in the room. If you have Agricola, do you need this? Before I address this question, I would like to do 2 things. First, I would like to refer you to Richard's final thoughts video, because he goes into very much detail about this. And actually, when I tell you my opinion in just a few moments, I will refer back to that video because it makes more sense instead of me blabbing just about the same things that he did. And a little disclaimer, or full disclosure, I worked at the Lookout booth at the Spiele. I got this game for free. I know many people, if not everybody, involved in the creation of this game personally. And while I'm not directly invested in the success of this game, they are. And of course, I'd be happy for them if this turns out to be a success. So please consider this when you're listening to everything I'm to say about now. So right out of the gate, I like this. I think this is a more streamlined version of the, let's call it a system. The fact that you, for example, don't have the renovations anymore, the fact that the cards are gone, although there's something that I have to come back later to. Also now that you have both the inside of the mountain, which has these new elements with the tiling, and the outside, which is more the classical things. I like that. I like that you get to do more. If you finish with the game, you have, I'm feeling more satisfied basically, because more has happened in the game. Yes, of course, more needs to happen because the harvests are tighter. I think the expeditions are a very nice addition. The idea is great that you can level up, so to speak, your dwarves, that the returns are getting better and better, that you can do most, if not all of the stuff that you could do otherwise as well. Now, of course, cards are gone and we have the furnishing tiles. More specifically, all the furnishing tiles are in play. On the one hand, I think it's a good idea because now you don't have these swingy hands that you could get in Agricola. Of course, if you did a draft or something or took out certain cards, that could be mitigated, but at least now everything starts on the same footing. On the other hand, if you play the game for the first time, yeah, of course, don't play with the full version because 48 different buildings is too much. If you cut it down, I think it's manageable. Other games do it the same. So for example, in Puerto Rico, you see all the buildings that are available right from the start of the game and you have to figure out how these might work together. So I think it's manageable, and once you've played a couple of times with the introductory version, then going to the full version and having 20 more buildings, I think it's manageable. The thing that now you don't have your personal strategy anymore because you don't have your own cards. I kind of miss that, I have to agree, but not because I liked figuring out my own strategy from the cards I got, but more so because those starting cards gave you a starting point of what to do. Similar to, I don't know, your role in Lords of Waterdeep or anything else where you start with something different than any other player. Here you come into the game and everything's full and wide open. Everybody starts the same, which is good, but on the other hand you don't have any indication where to go first. Yeah, I guess that's about my opinions. Again, for more and deeper thoughts, I refer you to Richard's video. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye. Thanks for watching.